And I wasn't fixing a broken ankle, and I didn't need a saw. And I was so sad because this person was so enthusiastic. They pulled the right card, but I didn't need a saw or a small fragment tray. And when I sort of grabbed the surgical preference card that was my card, and I kind of took a screenshot of it and kind of kept that for posterity. And looking at that card, I've used that as an example of an inaccurate surgical preference card that had more than just those two things that were wrong, but glaringly, you don't need a saw or a small fragment tray for a carpal tunnel. But the staff member, pulled the card as it was written.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now it's time to roll back and start the first case.
This week on First Case, we speak with Dr. Lenita Williamson, surgeon, CEO, and founder at ProcedureCard. And we are going to be talking about P cards, preference cards, procedure cards, whatever you want to call them, Melanie. But today, we're going to talk about the opportunity to really improve this situation. I think I'll just leave it right there. And there isn't anybody listening to this episode who doesn't know it's a situation.
You are absolutely right. There is so much opportunity to improve. I think everybody from the techs pulling the cases, reading the cards, to the scrub techs and the circulators that are setting up cases, to the surgeons that are frustrated when stuff isn't right. Everybody has felt the pain of an inaccurate preference card, and everybody wants this, as you put it, situation to be dealt with and fixed. And so it's a good conversation I think we're going to have today with just discussing the solutions that are out there.
We'll be right back with Dr. Lenita Williamson, surgeon, CEO, and founder at ProcedureCard.
Hi, I'm Paul Wafer.
I'm Melanie Perry.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
A 17 Studios production, you're listening to First Case.
Joining us now is Lenita Williamson, surgeon, CEO, and founder at ProcedureCard. And Dr. Williamson, thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to talk about this. We haven't really dove into P cards very much, and definitely not in the way we are going to discuss it today. So I wanted to thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
And why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you wound up coming across a solution for P cards? What led you that direction?
Well, just to be clear, we're talking about surgical preference cards in the operating room and all of the details involved with that topic. I am an orthopedic surgeon, practiced for 25 years plus. And in my time in the operating room, I was always frustrated with doing the same case day in, day out, and not having the proper equipment and tools. So I've transitioned or pivoted from orthopedic surgeon, and I've retired from that. And now I'm doing full-time tech as a CEO of a software company.
Excellent. So as you were kind of telling that story, what was it about these preference cards? I know you said, the opportunity to make sure that you got everything that you needed for the procedure, right? No delays, all of those issues. But what were some things that really stood out to you that were common issues over and over?
Well, I think the number one pain point in investigating surgical preference cards and how to make them better was the inability to update an inaccurate card. And if you distill all of or multiple different problems with the current card systems in many facilities, it really boils down to you can't get the card better or updated for the next time that card is used.
So when you and I were talking on the phone prior to this interview, you were talking about a specific incident that really just made you just say, no, we have to do this. We have to fix the problem. Can you tell that story to our listeners, just kind of your experience with it?
I'm so glad this is audio because I'm shaking my head and making faces. So when I really like to make sure I'm talking to the right audience. So if this audience, and I think this audience is in the operating room or surgical staff, I do carpal tunnel surgery every week, year in, year out. And about 17 years into my practice, I scheduled a routine carpal tunnel surgery, which is a very short 10-minute case that involves using a knife and some suture. And when I came in the operating room, I had a new staff member that was so excited to work with me. And they said, I pulled your preference card. I have everything on it. Let's go. And then I looked at the back table and there was a saw. There was a set of equipment used for fixing a broken ankle, sent the small fragment tray to the surgical staff. And I wasn't fixing a broken ankle and I didn't need a saw. And I was so sad because this person was so enthusiastic. They pulled the right card, but I didn't need a saw or a small fragment tray. And when I sort of grabbed the surgical preference card that was my card, and I kind of took a screenshot of it and kind of kept that for posterity. And looking at that card, I've used that as an example of an inaccurate surgical preference card that had more than just those two things that were wrong, but glaringly, you don't need a saw or a small fragment tray for a carpal tunnel. But the staff member, pulled the card as it was written. I was done.
So I guess I'm wondering a little bit about the reason why the wrong cards get pulled sometimes. Is it or the wrong instrument sets get pulled? Is it because the wrong card is used for a scheduled case, or is it just the wrong items on the card, or has the case been scheduled correctly? Some of those things can have an impact as well, correct?
Yes, all those play a role, but the main problem I see is that the card itself has the correct surgeon's name, has the correct procedure and codes, but the items on the card were just not right. Sometimes the surgeon will go to a conference and come back with these great ideas for a new way to do something a new way and say, okay, I love it. Let's do it this way from now on. Taking that new or updated technology or way of doing the procedure and then getting that updated on your card takes a long time. And so the next week that you're doing that same new thing, only the people who were in the room with you, who have a memory of how you did it, are up on what to pull and what to get for you. And that card is still inaccurate, and that can perpetuate. And then sometimes you do something a little different once, and then, unfortunately your card gets updated really quickly. And now it has this new nuanced step that you rarely do, but there it is on your card, and you maybe do it once every 5 or 6 years. So mainly a card that has an items of tools and instruments that is just not accurate.
One of my biggest frustrations with Pref cards at my last facility, and it was my responsibility to fix them, so it's not like I can point any fingers at anybody but me. But with our preference card system, I could go into the card and I could make changes, but every case that was already booked with that card, that change would not get reflected on those Pref cards. It would only go from that point forward. So I might make a change to Dr. Smith's card, but if Dr. Smith already has 4 surgical days booked with using that card, his card's not going to show those changes until new cases get booked, which I think was a very frustrating aspect of fixing cards, because you would say that you fixed it, but people wouldn't see that it was fixed because they still had the inaccurate card. So I guess my question is, how do you recommend we go about the change process? How should that change process happen?
Well, I think that when you look at what systems people use, you'd be surprised at how many facilities still use index cards, 3x5 cards, Excel spreadsheets, and especially at the outpatient surgery centers. The hospitals oftentimes will have some type of surgical preference card system, but oftentimes it's inaccessible, meaning that only one or two staff members can actually open the program to make a change to the card. I think that with digital technology and, newer ways of doing things, advancing from paper and pencil and legacy systems, when you are able to update a card electronically, it's updated across the system in real time. And then there are some systems that annotate who made changes and when. So you can look at a card and say, last week we made some changes, and look at a new card and say, yes, the changes were made at this date, at this time by this person. So having digital technology and having cloud-based technology is really a game changer and really is the way to go.
What you're saying is that you would have a system that's surgeon-based versus hospital or surgery center-based. Is that what you're talking about doing, so that anybody could pull it for you at any hospital? Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Well, that's a good question, because as a surgeon, I've talked to surgeons about this problem. And I can say this because I'm a surgeon. Most of them don't care. They just want the card right. They don't want to know the details about how to get it right. So the focus would be on the people who feel the pain point, which would be the techs that pull the cases and are scrubbed in during the case and can't leave to go and scramble and get things. They're stuck, they're scrubbed. And the circulating nurses. So those are the people who feel the pain the most when the card isn't right, having to run around between cases or during cases to get things. So I think that you can have systems that are hospital or facility based and allow different members of the surgical team access to it.
But what a great way to have that data all set to go. Anytime a surgeon is going to another facility, maybe they're working there, additionally within a health system, or if you are leaving one place and starting a new job, I know that's a huge challenge for supply chain, is trying to get all of the, preference cards set up and make sure that all the instruments are there and everything and ready to go, because they'll be like, hey, we're getting ready to, add this surgeon and add all these new procedures, and they want to be up and running day one. And then sometimes that's a little bit of a bumpy process, right?
Well, yes. And I've found that one way of making that a little smoother is I've talked to surgeons coming to town, new to town. And what often happens is we'll pull a card for another doctor who does a similar case and say, okay, here, this is how Dr. Smith does it, and you're Dr. Jones, and you're kind of stuck using things that you're not familiar with or things that are not in your toolbox. So I've seen situations where fellows or residents finishing training can reach back to their training locations and say, hey, I'd like to get a stack of the surgical preference cards that certain professors use, and then take that to the next place that they train. And so that gives them sort of some groundwork for having a set of cards that they're familiar with, that they like, that they've sort of used over the years, and gives them a better starting point. And then another thing I've found is that surgical preference cards are not proprietary. If you do a carpal tunnel at facility A and you say, I'd like to borrow that card and use it at a new place, why not? There's no secret sauce in a list of tools or instruments. And some facilities and some people think, well, those are our cards at our place. There's no secret sauce to it. And just like baking a cake, you might have all the list of tools and ingredients, but only the chef knows the nuances of how to make that wonderful. So I've found that making the cards in a silo and not being able to take them with you or use the card across facilities is not good for the patients.
Another thing that gets pretty confusing is just terminology. Like sometimes the names for the instruments are almost like, pet names from the facility versus their official name from the manufacturer. How do you deal with standardizing the terminology and even in the descriptions on these preference cards?
That's so funny, because the smaller ambulatory places are sort of mom and pop. Everyone knows everything, all the instruments. And those are the places that can use nicknames and can get away with it.
Right.
And because everybody's familiar with the toilet bowl that I use for, shoulder reconstruction. And, if you ask for a toilet bowl, doesn't sound right. So at smaller places, they want it that way and they like it that way and they can continue to do that. But the bigger enterprise or the bigger facilities, what you can rely on is the inventory list of standardized items with their name, with their reference number, either an internal reference number or an external one from the vendor, and maybe even where the product is located when defining that item. And all of those pieces make it easy to standardize. And electronically, it makes it easier to update and change because you can just, push data up or, every cart that has toilet bowl, we're now going to call a glenoid retractor. And so using tech and coding, you can easily grab a name, a nickname, and then turn it into a standardized name. So that's just another advantage of coding and using technology to improve the cards.
What about managing the change of the cards? You were saying that in some facilities, you're only allowing one or two people to change those cards. What is your recommendation for who can be involved in that, and how do you check to make sure that they're being updated on a regular basis?
Well, I think you're right in that access is key to updating the cards. And when you have one or two people only allowed to open that program, you're really stuck and it puts you in a funnel. So having an electronic system that, for example, has differential permissions. Anybody can open the deck and look at the set of cards, but maybe only certain people can edit or update. And I think that having those controls can control who edits cards. And then sometimes some systems will even document who made changes and when. So you sort of have a paper trail, cookie crumbs of who did what and when. Auditing and keeping the cards updated, I think there are a few ways to go about it. I think that the smartest way and one of the ways that you get the best engagement from the staff is when you grab their busiest cards from your busiest surgeons or your most common procedures and you work there. Because you get immediate gratification when you've updated that card that they're going to use tomorrow and the next day. So a really common procedure or a surgeon that's just there doing a lot of cases, when you fix their cards and review their cards, you get that immediate satisfaction. For example, one facility said, okay, we're going to update and look at everyone's card. Let's start with the letter A. Well, Dr. Adams hasn't been there in 4 years. You don't even know when they'll be there again. And when you're trying to update a card as somebody who's not even very active, it's a lot of grunt work and is very low satisfaction rate. So I think that streamlining and updating the cards when you work with a specific system of maybe your busy people is a lot easier to do. And you get the reward right away when they have a good card the next day.
Okay, so I am an OR circulator, and so my brain goes in all the different directions when you talk about people playing in the Pref cards of maybe more of a devil's advocate type question. But there's a fine line between not having enough people to make edits in Prep cards and not having those things being kept up to date, and then having too many people making too many changes when the changes don't need to be put there. I would frequently have people who did not work in a surgeon's room regularly come to me and say, you have to put this on the card. You have to put this on the card. We use this, and this, change the card. And then the circulator or the scrub who worked in the room all of the time said, don't you dare put that on the card. We don't need that. So how do you manage that communication to make sure that the cards are getting changed like they need to be, but they're getting changed with the correct information?
Well, one solution is when you're starting a case and you open up the surgical preference card, put it on the monitor. Now most ORs have a big screen and you can put that card up in big, bold, 60-inch TV screen, and the whole team can see the card and not only see the card, but use it to make sure before they start they have everything. But having that card in the hands or the eyeballs of multiple people makes it easier to see the problem and identify what needs to be updated. When you're looking at a piece of paper or maybe just one screen, you don't have sort of a community or team approach to updating the card. But you're right. You don't want people who aren't familiar with that room or that surgeon putting in, too much data about what they think the card should have on it. So when some facilities are initiating using a digital system, I think they have a dedicated team. They scrub the cards and see the common errors and the common mistakes. And then they teach everyone, if you see A, this is what we're going to use now, calling it B. So having a team approach to it in the beginning and then fine tuning it when cards are in the deck is one way to go about it.
I was just wanting to get your opinion on the cost impact of these incorrect cards. What do you think the opportunity is to reduce costs in the operating room by having accurate preference cards?
Well, that's a really big topic, and that's where the CFOs and the administrators, that's what they want to see. They don't feel the pain so much of the wrong card in the case, but the cost of the case. So if I can just quickly start at the beginning. When you pull or pick a case the day before, you use the surgical preference card and get the items. Right then and there, you are losing money when you have staff waste time getting a set of instruments and tools that have missing items or the wrong items. Then next, when you are about to start the case and open the case and you realize I don't have this or that, now you have the staff running around between cases to get the items that they know they need. And that causes a delay in the turnover and causes, you're using your staff resources to get things between cases. So that's a second cost. And then during surgery, which was painful for me, when I'm in the middle of a procedure with a patient asleep and wide open, when I ask for an item and they don't have it, at the average cost of $62 a minute of OR time, that's significant cost. And what is the cost to the patient in terms of wound or infection or door openings that are performed going in and out of the OR to obtain these items? And then during surgery, oftentimes you'll just open up all the equipment that you need and find out that we're not going to use that. And you can see an unused item get open and thrown away. And who pays for that? I think that when you look at things kind of in a systematic approach, you can see that all the way through the case, you can find ways to improve the cost or you can find ways to minimize loss. But then one more is, what is the cost when you have to cancel a case? You have a case and you don't have what you need. You've looked all around and you absolutely just can't do it. There's a significant cost to the facility because that's OR time. That's equipment that's already been opened. And then the patient. It's tough to explain why your surgery was canceled and you were in the room, but, and almost went to sleep or did. So those are the costs, directly and indirectly, of when you don't have an accurate card.
Well, and the cost of just bad HCAP scores, right? Like that last piece, it's difficult to explain, but there's nothing worse than having a patient show up for a procedure, not have the procedure. You're probably not going to get really high ratings, and that can impact reimbursement. So those things do matter greatly. Lenita, this is a definite area of opportunity for improvement. I mean, anybody that has ever touched a preference card knows that there's a lot of opportunity and that it's difficult to maintain them in many cases. Technology has to be the way to get it done. Is there anything you want to add before we wrap up the interview?
Well, I just think that the digitizing the surgical preference cards is the next step and the way to go. With COVID and the new normal, I think everyone's looking and reevaluating how they do things. And so this is a perfect opportunity to make the changes and update the systems. And even with the digital technology, you can have staff do this from home. Or if you have staff on light duty or modified duty, they can do that when they can't scrub or be in the operating room. So I think that digitizing surgical preference cards is just a change for the better. And it's within our reach.
I hadn't really thought about that light duty piece, but I think that that's really key, just trying to find things for people to do on light duty like that. And the more we leverage technology, the more likely we're going to have ways to take, expertise in the operating room, knowledge, experience, etc., and, be able to contribute when, to your point, they're not able to resume normal work activities. So I would think, even from a human resources component, there's a significant, upside to, not only this with the preference cards, but just that whole general concept being wrapped around how we deal with light duty. So great job on the interview, Dr. Williamson. It was a pleasure having you on today.
Thanks for having me.
That was Dr. Lenita Williamson, surgeon, CEO, and founder at ProcedureCard. And while she's no longer actively working as a surgeon directly with patients, she knows all of the pain that comes with managing preference cards, not only setting them up, but maintaining them, how many people can actually change the preference card so that it doesn't get loose once it has been managed and maintained pretty well, and ultimately how we can leverage technology to really solve, what has been kind of a frustrating problem for a lot of people, Melanie.
Yeah, it has. Me included. I've been frustrated by preference cards ever since I started in the OR, and I was reading surgeons' preferences off of this 5x7 index card that had been copied 85,000 times, and you couldn't read it anymore. And it's a frustrating process, and there's good solutions that exist to fix the problem, and it's something that we can fix. And she offered just really good ideas about making them digital, making them available to be changed, that we can really apply to the future to make it better for everybody.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for this week's show. As a reminder, you can help support First Case by subscribing on Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcasts. You can also find us on Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or just simply search for First Case Podcast on your favorite application. You can also access bonus content for certain episodes, but you got to download our smartphone app for iPhone and Android. And hey, while you're there, we'd certainly appreciate a rating and a review because your feedback is important to the show. On behalf of Paul, Melanie, and myself, thank you for listening to this week's episode of First Case.